First of all, I must tell you before I start, when I was still planning Newslaundry, or actually I think we'd launched it and I was figuring out the way forward, I met Rob at a session, and it was his success that kind of gave me hope to try a subscription-only model because of this spectacular success. And he shared with me some of the practices that they do, which I thought were really clever. So those of you who are not familiar with Rob, and I ask you each time I say this, including yesterday, Wijnberg or Wijnberg. Wijnberg. Rob Wijnberg. At the age of 27, he became the youngest editor-in-chief of a national daily newspaper in Europe, nrc.next. He has a very accomplished record, but the most recent success story of his has been Der Correspondent, which is a subscription-only news website. They have now, in fact, yesterday the figure you shared was 65,000.
No, 60.
60,000.
Maybe it's already 65, I don't know.
So on yesterday's panel, 60,000 paying subscribers. Their crowdfunding, when they launched, they raised $1.7 million. Dollars.
Yes.
And it's a world record. And his philosophy to news is very counterintuitive. I mean, I heard his session in the morning, and I've heard him in the past. So it's a new model. Some would say it's a model for a new species. As we know ourselves now, we will not take to it so easily. But he's proved that some people do. Now, if we can figure out why it works and what are you doing right that others can replicate or aren't, maybe we can, leave as professionals who can do more with our products. So, Rob, to begin with, you describe yourself in the TED Talk of you that I saw, not as a journalist or a news professional. He says, as a philosopher, not even as a philosopher, because they title him as a philosopher. He says, I'm neither a philosopher, neither a journalist. Why is that? And how do you describe yourself?
Yes, I'm a thinking journalist, which is very rare.
Right, and why is that?
Well, because I've been working in journalism for, 15 years. I'm getting old. 15 years already. And the one thing that struck me most, when I started in journalism, I still studied philosophy. And the two worlds couldn't be more different. Studying philosophy is a very different world than working at a newspaper, for example. And the most striking difference is, the whole study of philosophy is about thinking hard, about questions that are impossible to answer. And the biggest difference at a newspaper is there's very little thinking going on. There's a lot of making going on. There's a lot of speed and a lot of competition and a lot of haste, as it were. But there's not much reflection on what are we doing? Why are we doing this? Why are we telling people this? It's more about being first or having a scoop or attracting attention. I wrote a book called The News Factory because that's how it felt to me, that I was working in a factory. And the factory produced 48 pages of news every day.
How long were you working here?
First I worked at the most popular newspaper in the Telegraph, which is like, it's a sleazy newspaper. It's like tabloid, yes. When I was 19 until I was 24. And then I went to work at the NRC, which is kind of like the New York Times of the Netherlands. It's much smaller, of course, but it's a quality newspaper. And there I saw that basically news was whatever other media were talking about. And every time the day started, we had a meeting and we looked at all the other media, and then we were saying, oh, CNN has this and the New York Times has that, and the other newspapers in the Netherlands talk about this. We have to do something with this. And rarely was the question asked, why should we do the same stories as everybody else? Why do we think it's important to tell these stories, or do we think other stories are important? And when I became editor-in-chief of the morning edition of the NRC, the first thing I did was, I was 27, so most of the people who I became the boss of were older than me. And I asked them, I sat down with all 30 of them, and I said, if you could invent your job now, just make it up, make your job, what would you be doing? And every one of them didn't describe the job they had, which worried me because apparently they were not doing what they would do if they were able to. So that got me wondering, why are we doing what we're doing if everybody in the room thinks we should be doing something else? So the things I try to do is free up, let's say, journalists to do what they really care about. And if you do, you will notice that they will write very different stories and they will tell you very different things about the world than if they just do what they're supposed to do. So for example, the economy editor, he could tell stories and stories and stories about how, for example, the growth rate of economies is a mythical number that doesn't make sense. And he explained to me why this doesn't make sense and why we should be careful using these numbers, etc., etc. And then the next day, I opened the newspaper and there it was, just a small news story about the growth number of the economy in the Netherlands. And he wrote it. And I asked him, why did you write this story if you told me yesterday it doesn't make sense? And he said, well, I'm supposed to. That's what we do. We get the press release and we get the information from all these press agencies and then we type up the stories as we go along. So what I try to do is let journalists follow their heart more and follow their moral compass and just facilitate, not tell them what to write, but facilitate them in writing what they want to write. And when we did, the response of the audience was amazing. So
your numbers actually went up after you did that?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. Actually, when I started as the editor-in-chief at the newspaper, we had a daily circulation of subscription rate of 65,000. When it after 2 years, it was at 87,000. So, which is a huge number, especially.
Did the number of stories per day come down?
No, because, well, yes, I shrunk the newspaper. We started out with 36 pages and I shrunk it to 28. So we had to do less. And what we wrote was better because we had to do less. No, it was a huge success and the response of the audience was, I felt, was that they were really connecting to the stories we told because you could tell we cared more about what we were writing to them. Actually, when I left, I was fired.
Why?
Why? Yes, that's a good question. I don't know why. No, well, the short answer is the board of directors of the newspaper felt that the newspaper was didn't contain enough news. So there was not enough. They said you should focus on the news. And I was like, no, this is news, just not the news you know already. But they didn't want that, and that's why they said, you can stay with us and work for us, but not as an editor-in-chief. And then I said, well, if you're firing me well, then I'll leave, and I'll do my own thing. And actually, the subscription of the newspaper went from 87,000 to 27,000 when I left. And actually, the subscriptions of the platform I founded, the correspondent, went from 17,000 at the crowdfunding to 60,000.
So, if I may ask you a question there, that would suggest that if the board, if profit motive is why they invest in news,
yes,
then firing you was not a smart decision, because
you tell them.
Yeah, no, but because Indian media has that problem. A lot of people, including, the largest, I don't believe Dhirubhai Ambani, Mukesh Ambani is investing in news and media because something that has a turnover of 400 crore shouldn't matter to someone who has turnover of 40,000 crore. The fact is that he will use that to influence other interests of his. That's why I believe a lot of... So, would that be the reason? Because if you just go for the sake of its own product, why would they do that?
No, but you have to make a distinction between two kinds of profit. You have long-term profits, and you have short-term profits. And firing me was a very good idea on the basis of short-term profits. Because if you, and this is, by the way, the strategy most traditional newspapers have. It's called, I know the Dutch word, I have to find an English word. It's called, let's say, the Dutch word translates like, it's the cemetery strategy. Cemetery strategy. So,
to bury something.
Yeah, so this means the following. Most traditional newspapers have a cemetery strategy in the sense that they know they're dying. They know they can tell their audiences are shrinking, the subscription revenue is shrinking, and their ad revenue is shrinking. And this has been going on for 10, 15 years. So especially, I don't know the numbers here, but the numbers in Europe are that the newspaper industry shrinks, market shrinks 2% a year on average. And if this goes on for years and years, then eventually the market will collapse. And it will collapse sooner than you think, because actually the print model is not viable, because...
Sure. And digital will become more ubiquitous, it'll be...
Yes, but the digital market doesn't generate the same revenue, because ad revenue is much lower than print revenue. So what they do is, they know they're shrinking, and they're not really thinking about something that would turn it around. They're just trying to sit out their time by slowly dismantling the organization step by step. So the first thing the new editor-in-chief, my boss at the NRC, did when he came in was fire 30 editors. And the reason why they fired me was similar, because what they could do was the kind of stories I wanted to tell are much more expensive to make, because they take way more time, they take way more...
So basically, in the short term, in terms of cutting costs,
they
don't see the long-term benefit of the subscription.
Exactly. Cutting costs is essential, and if you cut costs enough, or if you cut costs more than your revenue goes down, then your eventual profits go up. So that's basically what most newspapers strategize.
Now, Rob, you know, we've seen a lot of experiences shared, both from the digital media space in India. You know, we have Mike and Suki here from the US, and all that they've done. Now, the three of you have the privilege of working on stories for 6 months, 8 months. Suki wrote a book. Mike's come up with one of the most phenomenal investigations of his time. And your model is also, you say speed doesn't work. Now, while we are building Newslaundry on the model that you prescribe, but I must ask, everyone who is using the speed model, surely there is a rationale, there's thinking behind it. They have data that suggests that this works, because the fact is, at least in television news, whoever breaks the story, whoever's first to the story, gets most of the traffic of eyeballs. And let alone the data, even as a human being. You know, like in yesterday's panel, you said as a human being, what matters to you? Global warming matters because our existence depends on it, and common sense, that's true. Similarly, common sense also tells me that suppose something's happened right now and there's a disaster. Whoever's giving me this story first, I will go to that person. And if the frequency of disasters increases, the pressure to report first on it increases. So isn't there an inevitability to the speed news phenomena as well? I mean, it's not quite irrational in that sense.
No, absolutely. In my book, actually, one of the first things I say is, if news wasn't around, if we just stopped doing news at all, then 2 minutes later it would be reinvented immediately. Why? Well, actually, news in a very deep sense of the word is what people do since the beginning of time. They tell each other what is happening around them. They tell, oh, there's a lion coming, or there's a danger there. And whoever knows first is in an advantage. It's basically an evolutionary thing. So news is the professionalization of what human beings will do forever. So yes, there's an inevitability, but there's not an inevitability that this is the only thing people want. this is the only thing people need, and there's absolutely no necessity to join in this effort when starting a journalism platform. There are many ways people want to be informed, and this is one of them. It now seems the only one. It's the most dominant model of information, and everybody seems to be in the same rat race. So let me put it this way: if all journalism was the kind of journalism we produce, then I would say let's start a current affairs speedy platform, because that's what we need as well. I think of journalism more of an art form, where the more kinds of journalism you have, the better it becomes.
So it's not like you're saying one has to exist at the cost of the other. They have to coexist to be a part and, you know, service different kinds of news,
exactly,
different kind of products and different kinds of viewers.
But now comes the problematic part of it, of this whole industry. Because first of all, the influence of the industry is very far-reaching. So the kind of information they produce has a huge impact on our society, way more impact than it should have. So, for example, I basically know only Dutch examples, but political debates, for example, are hugely influenced by news gathering. Our worldview is hugely influenced by news. So, for example, there was a poll in Europe a few months ago in 24 countries that asked, what do you think is the biggest danger to your society? And unanimously, they said terrorism, which is statistically and factually just simply untrue.
So what you're saying is that is a product of
too
much of information on a subject that is disproportionately impacting.
Yes, there are millions of people dying from sugar overdose every day, and you never hear it reported. Terrorism is the best example. I mean, you could even say that the whole phenomenon of terrorism is largely so successful because it fits the news concept so well. I once wrote an essay where I compared terrorism or terror attacks to press releases. They're the most extreme form of press releases thinkable, because you know it will generate the media attention you need, and it's basically the whole reason why you attack.
That's brilliant, actually.
Why you attack in the first place. It doesn't matter who gets killed, because you're not fighting an army. It matters that somebody gets killed, so you attract the attention to your ideology. That's the foremost reason why all these terror organizations claim the attack, because then they hook on to the media attention they're generating, even if they're not even responsible for it. So there are all these kinds of problems that misshape our worldview and that misshape our politics, and even I mean, the worst part of news is it really generates cynicism and distrust among people. I mean, the level of distrust that you get towards any people around you, and especially people who don't look like you, I might say. Foreigners, for example. The whole immigration debate is in Europe and in the Western countries and anywhere is hugely negatively influenced by news, because news is the exception to the rule, and you just...
while it is the exception to the rule, it becomes the norm for the consumer. It becomes the norm,
yes. We have politicians in the Netherlands claim things like, not every terrorist is a Muslim, but not every Muslim is a terrorist, but every terrorist is a Muslim. And they get away with it because the only terrorist attacks you see in the news are claimed by Muslims. So news generates fundamental myths in the worldview of people that influence the way we see and we act towards each other, that are just not based in facts.
You know, Rob, now I'm just going to go into another space, and we touched upon this on the panel yesterday, and I wanted to go into a little deeper today. Those of you who didn't see the panel yesterday, I'll just give you the context, and then I'd like Rob's view. Again, Newslaundry is a ad-free model. We don't have any advertising on our website. We only go by subscription revenue. However, I know it's a struggle. We've been doing this for the last 5 years, but I believe that is the only way for news to survive. So I'm with you in practice. But we must entertain the idea of why and where and when it's working, because then we can really investigate and make it better. Now, this is my thesis was that in Netherlands, where your basics are taken care of, it is a much more, well taken care of society where there's a certain level of socialized basic amenities that the citizen gets because that it's been like that forever. So they don't mind, giving money for news, raising 1.7 million for a news website. And their only pitch was, we are 12 journalists when you started this, when you had pitched?
Yes, 12, yes.
So 12 journalists with integrity and credibility that most people in the country knew. They said, here, we'll give the money, start off. So, they start off like that. But in India, when most of the country, like I said, doesn't get enough to eat, is it too much to expect them to pay for news? That's one part. And second, after your spectacular success in Europe, you have just launched in the US as well. Tell me, do you see, and take your time in explaining this, a difference in, now Europe and US may not be as different as Europe and India, but there will be some differences socially. Is there a difference in the consumer engagement and consumer behavior towards news in your US and Europe, where it's more responsible there, the culture of giving back to society is more evolved over there than it is in the US? And if that is so, would not the model depend a lot on the society you exist in?
Right, okay. Two very big questions. Very big questions. To answer your first question, look, if you don't have enough money to eat, then I wouldn't expect you to pay money for news or journalism in general. That's your first basic need, food and shelter. If you're at the bottom of the Maslow pyramid...
Okay, let's not go that far. Maybe you're getting food and shelter, but you're not well off. You don't have a comfortable life.
Okay, so I would definitely think that, let's say if you have your basic needs covered, then true and relevant information about the world surrounding you is a very important thing to people. You can tell because actually what people do the first thing, if they have a little money left over, is go to a bar and interact with people to talk about what is going on around them. That is actually the most common social behavior you can get. And journalism, in a sense, is very much just a mirror of that social interaction. I really see journalism as a conversation, not just informing people, but just a conversation about what is going on around them and helping people cope with what is going on around them. But if you expect them to pay, the relevancy of the information must be huge. It must be very much catered to what people need to actually survive in their daily lives. But I think it would be of great interest to people with very little means to understand the job market they're in, for example, or to understand where their food is coming from, or to understand, crime and corruption in their neighborhood, or stuff like that. And even somebody of little means would be very much interested in, I would say, something huge and big like climate change, for example, because they might understand why the water keeps flooding in their neighborhood. Climate change is not just a global phenomenon, but a local phenomenon as well. So I would say yes, it is very possible to, even with, it's not a luxury product to understand the world around you.
And the US and the Europe experience?
The US. Well, I might add, by the way, that I would definitely try the model of subscription-based news, but if you are in a country with not as much means. The Netherlands is the 5th richest country in the world, so there are a lot of means. Average Dutch person makes $40,000 a year. So I would try a pay-what-you-can model. So you say, we have to pay our journalists to do this, but you can pay whatever you can afford. Actually, I think it's a model that will work everywhere. So people who have a little more can pay a little more. So the people who have little less can pay a little less. That's what I would suppose. There has been research on pay-what-you-can models that is amazing. So you see that people who can afford to pay more will actually pay a lot more than the people who can afford less will pay less. So in the end, you will be better off. So I will try that model. In the US, well, actually, we're collaborating with the New York University now to research this very question. What is different about the US or the English-speaking world that we need to learn first before exporting our model to the US? So we're not saying, okay, this is our model, we're going to copy it, and then here we go. I think there are some parts that will definitely be the same. Like, we're definitely going to be ad-free, for example. We're definitely going to be reader-funded, etc. But the way, for example, you pitch the message you have, the idea you have, might be very different because the wording we use might not be recognized by American consumers. I think it will be, by the way, because the problems I described with news are very much, maybe even most current in the United States. I mean, there's no country with such a hyper-commercialized, nonsensical, sensational news media as the United States. I mean, they got a president out of it.
Yes.
I mean, the news media gave birth to this presidency, and is a direct consequence of the fact that I don't think. I would like to talk about North Korea with who was there? Who was there?
Suki, there she is.
Oh, yeah, because I think North Korea and the United States have something in common, and that is the complete misconception of Americans they have about their own country. It's very. I actually wrote something about this. That it's strikingly the same as a totalitarian country as North Korea. They are constantly bombarded with some kind of mythical propaganda about their own country that they actually believe. So, for example, Americans believe hugely in the social mobility of their own country that doesn't exist already for 40 years.
That's mythical, and they have data suggesting
the American
that
dream is exactly what it says it is. It's a dream. It doesn't even exist. There's no industrialized country in the world where the social mobility is so low as in the United States, and yet everybody seems to believe the opposite. Another good example is income inequality in the United States. Most Americans think the income inequality in their own country is hugely less than it actually is, and they even want it to be less than it already they think it is. There was a poll amongst 1,500, a random sample of 1,500 Americans, who said, describe the ideal income inequality in your country, and what they said was, what they drew was similar to Sweden. And Sweden is the most progressive, income equal country in the world. And this is from the country that says to itself, no, you can, if you make it rich, and if you're poor, that's your own fault. So, and I largely believe that these misconceptions of their own country is due to hyper sensational news media that just portray reality as something that it isn't.
Okay. Now, I'd just like you to tell us a little bit about best practices, and after that, if you have any questions, please keep them ready. We'll come to questions. But before that, I'll just tell you, Newslaundry had adopted one of their best practices, which Rob had mentioned to me at a conference we met a few years ago. He said, when people share your stories on social media, let it go with the line that this is a gift to you, paid for by a subscriber of Newslaundry. So that someone who reads it realizes someone has paid for this. I'm using it free, because the model wasn't that if you're not a subscriber, you don't get to see the content. You still get to see the content. If you want to pay, you pay. So he says, and that message increases the likelihood of someone saying, you know what, it's like guilt tripping. It's like emotional, like parents do to you. Haan, dena hai to de do, nahi to. And it worked. So this...
Yeah, we actually do this with our ebooks as well. With our ebooks. Our electronic books. Okay, we publish books.
Ebooks, right.
Ebooks, yes. Regularly, traditional publishers put a lock on ebooks. So you can buy one, and if you email to somebody else, then you can't open it. Which is, in my mind, completely ridiculous because you say, oh, I like this book, I have to give it to my friend. So what we did is we took the lock off and we said, share with anybody who you like. And it just says, when you do, it just says, this book has been given you by the person and the name of the person who bought it from the correspondent. So it's a very easy way, and this is actually the one thing that brings in most new members. So most new members come in via shared articles of members.
So, what I got was a lot of the solutions to this are not tech solutions. They are more psychological solutions of understanding the human mind and why a person consumes news. And that's his entire approach. And oftentimes I've seen, like, when we had an economist as the prime minister, he thought that the solution to everything is growth. There's the red corridors becoming, growth rate is this, more industrial. If you're an economist, that's all you'll think. You don't understand that there's some social pressures as well. Now we have a prime minister, the solution to everything is Hindutva. I mean, what I'm saying is that if you only have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. That's what the proverb is, right? So, your solution of how to get people is not data-driven, check out what is their demographic, because their website does not gather data on its subscribers. In fact, that is one of the USPs there. They say, we are not gathering your data about age, where you live, how old you are, what are you shopping for, what you browse, right? You don't gather that data. So that is another confidence-building mechanism between the reader and them. If there are any other such tips you can give us that I can copy for Newslaundry, and if others can also use, and after that we'll take questions.
Well, basically, I mean, all the things, I don't know if I was raised like this. I mean, both my parents were psychologists, are psychologists, actually.
Now, that explains it.
That explains it? Okay. But it comes so natural to me, and all the things, the things you say are basically just what you don't want others to do to you, don't you to do them to others. So that's one very simple rule. And you can also change it a little bit by saying what you want other people to do it yourself. And it's very, I mean, if you look at it this way, it's so easy to come up with these things. So for example, we would like to grow, right? We would like to grow a subscriber base. Why? Because we can do more things. When we have more members, we can hire more journalists, we can make more stories, we can do better stories, we have more time, we have better food, we have better housing, etc., etc. That's why we want to grow. So so what is our message to potential subscribers in our newsletters and at the bottom of our articles? Help us grow so we can do these, and these things. It's very simple. It's not mathematics. So the only thing is you have to be.
But do you have the data? Should the sign be in yellow or red? That's a joke.
Oh, it's a joke. No.
Because there is data. You see, anyone who's advised me, do an A/B testing. Have the sign in yellow and have it in red. See where it gets clicked more.
Yes.
Then put all your signs red.
Yes.
That's typically how consultants.
Sure, it might work. People are wired that way. I mean, even there was research that people who sit on the left, no, I'm sorry, on the right of the audience are more convincing than the people on the left. So people believe me more than you. It's simple brain science. But yeah, I'm sure all these research things say that. But the one thing that people respond to most, I think, is just basic honesty. Like, just say what you want. Say what you want to do. Say what you want to accomplish. Say what you did for it. That's why, I mean, the worst conversations I've had in my life at the newspaper I work with was with the PR part of the company. Very nice people. Very, I mean, smart. They were
well-meaning, well-intentioned.
Well-meaning, well-intentioned. But the whole business they were in was just figuring out how to acceptably lie about the things you do. Like, I mean, that's what I had a conversation just now with somebody who said, I'm in PR and I'm not dishonest. And I said, no, I'm sure you're not dishonest, but the whole PR industry is like an acceptable institutionalized form of lying. Because hey, you have to portray yourself as being something. Just portray yourself as what you are. So, for example, we, and I don't know if these tips are useful to you, but we constantly tell our journalists and everybody, and also our designers and stuff, be honest. So if you don't know something, say so. If you're still figuring something out, say so. If you want to have help, say so. So constantly, like, very much, actually what we try to do is very much just translate very normal, social, acceptable behavior into the online platform. So, for example, for our comment section is great. No cursing, no conspiracy theories, no nothing. Why? Because we talk to the members who respond there as if they were in a room. So if somebody just stands up here and just starts shouting conspiracy theories, then probably one of us would say, please don't, please sit down. And if he continues, then you will escort him out the door, probably, because that's not the socially acceptable thing to do here. If you do it on an online platform, everybody goes like, oh, what do we have to do? Oh, freedom of speech. Oh, no, it's just, yeah, you're having a conversation. You're disturbing the conversation. If you say so, people stop. The very basic thing we do constantly every day. So if somebody goes over the line in our comment section, we just say, yeah, this is not really what we're here for. Please don't do this anymore. And they stop. They even say, oh, I'm sorry. Because they know, hey, there's a person, actual person there that is actually trying to do his work in this comment section. So the basic tip I would give is try to think of how would you do this, let's say,
in the real world.
Yeah, in the real world, or even better, how would you do this at home? That's the question I always ask. How would you do this at home? Would you so there are so many practices that have been, I think, been seen as acceptable in business life that no home would ever accept, right? The way you treat people, the way you judge people, the way you talk to people. So, for example, when we have evaluation conversations with me, the editor-in-chief, and the correspondents, I don't go like, sit down and we have to fill in all these paperworks and you were late 20 times. And no, we have an actual, we actually, we don't sit down, we walk and we say, how is it going? And what are your troubles? And why are you, I like that story, I didn't like that story, what was wrong? Actually having actual conversations with each other. That just basically does it. And if you translate the way you treat each other to the way you treat your reader, that will help.
Okay, thank you. Questions? We have one over there.
Hey, Rob. The respondents, the CMS you guys have built, and I was just having a conversation with you. So, though I do understand that you need to make a CMS of your own because the subscription model needs are very different. But is it a strategic approach to explore other revenue streams also? Is that at the back of your mind also? Because you will be putting it out in the market for others to use also.
Yes. Well, we built our own CMS basically for one reason.
A CMS, for those of you who know, is the content management system, which is the basic, the tech and the interface that your content sits on. So it works with a certain logic. That's what a CMS is.
Exactly. And actually, we call our CMS a community management system and not a content management system because we try to build it around the idea that having conversations with your readers is crucial to the content. So it's not just putting out content, but it's having communities or building communities on your platform. And we try to build all these kinds of tools that enable journalists and other people to build those communities. So, for example, there's a whole member administration tool in it, and there's a crowdfunding tool, and there's a whole contribution section tool in it as well. But yes, we are trying to developing this is very expensive. So what we try to do is we want to finance the development and the further development of the platform by licensing it to other platforms. And we also have a manifesto. We're writing it right now. We also have a manifesto outlining the principles behind the CMS. One is, for example, we don't want venture capital. And we don't want, or at least we don't want venture capital that is for maximizing profits. So we want to make profits but not maximize it. That's one principle. We will also, we'll do it for ad-free platforms. That's the second. And the third is we will only do it for subscriber-based platforms. So it's a CMS specifically built for people who want to build a subscriber-based community.
Will you give Newslaundry a discount?
We have to talk about it, yes. No, there's no discount necessary, because what we want to do is we want to do a fee that is based on the number of subscribers you have. So if you have 1,000 subscribers, you pay way less than if you have 100,000 subscribers. So it will be accessible to the smallest and to the biggest platforms out there. And yes, we want to pay the technology from that revenue.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Venkatesh. I've been asking you questions before as well. Just how would your community management system, how is it different from, let's say, Medium?
Well, exactly. Well, I don't know the CMS behind Medium myself, because
in principle.
In principle.
Yeah.
Well, basically, the main difference is that we try to not make a publishing tool that allows you to just publish stuff, but we try to build a let's say a community tool where all the tools you need to actually communicate, not just publishing, but communicate and build a community, a knowledge community, is in it. So, for example, we are building our own MailChimp facility. So all newsletters and all email traffic will go through the system as well. And also what we did is we tried to make it privacy friendly. So we made sure that all data that you receive from using the CMS is in your own account. So we don't get the data, like Google, for example. We used Google Analytics a lot for our data, and we stopped using it because we didn't want to give Google all the data we were getting from our subscribers. So, and this is one feature that also is an integral part of the CMS, is that the data is yours, not ours. We also, there are a few principles where you have to comply and tell that's an integral feature of the platform, is you have to tell the users, your readers, your subscribers, what data you are collecting. You cannot be, there's no, these 40,000 words is our privacy statement. You're not going to read it because you're not going to understand it. Are you going to click on OK? Yes, thank you. That's not what we're going to do, because you have to understand, and you also have to be able to say no to certain data collections. That's also a distinguishable part of the CMS. And I could go on for longer, but better is that the person who builds it, our CTO, he could explain to you much more.
Hi, I'm Maitri. I want to know how you stand apart in terms of the reportage that you have managed, because you talked about how newspaper businesses have this hasty idea of bringing out news, and that your organization is standing different. And how did you manage with just 12 people in the beginning, and how did it grow in terms of how would you tell the story differently?
Well, that's a good question. Of course, we publish around 3 to 5 different separate stories a day. But what is a distinguishable feature of it is that they are basically part of what we call a learning curve. So what we mean by a learning curve is a journalist starts a research project. It could be on anything. Let's say healthcare, something like that. And the learning curve starts at the bottom. I don't know the answers to my questions yet. And so all of our series of stories start with a story that tells you, this is what I want to figure out. These are the questions I have. These are the sources I already use. And can you help me? So, for example, if you're researching healthcare, are you a doctor and could you help me with this question? Or are you a patient and could you help me with this question? That's basically how we start. And then all stories evolve into separate stories. There can be small updates, there can be big breaking stories. But all these stories are part of this curve. So all correspondents also write a weekly newsletter where they tell you about the progress they made in their research. They will tell you, this is what I found, this is what I didn't find, this is what I'm looking at now, etc., etc. And if you are interested in, you can chip in, you can help them. And then eventually, the bigger stories will be the main features of the series. And then at the end, we will try to make a collection of all the stories we made. So you will get the whole, so if you missed, let's say, the beginning, or you missed the middle, you didn't follow the whole learning curve, then you can redo it yourself. So we call them themes. So, for example, we have a theme on climate change, and it explains the basics, and then it explains for advanced reading, and explains, etc., etc. So that's basically how we do stories. We don't do single stories. We do series of stories, and that's we get a lot of questions of people saying, why aren't you in Blendle, for example, or why don't you do a paper article? And we say, we don't want you to paper article because one article is just a very small part of the thing you're reading, and we want you to be part of the community because we want you to read everything. We can't explain complex issues like climate change or bureaucracy in healthcare within a single story. So we want you to follow the whole curve. That's how we generally publish stories. Of course, there are single stories if it's applicable, but generally that's how we work.
Alpana, one question here. We have time for just one last one. After that, we have to wind up.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about, well, in your earlier session, you talked about the contact you have with your readers and your subscribers, about trolling and how you can control that, which being a subscription model you can. But here I want to ask you a larger question. What is your idea of influencing the debate so long as you remain a subscription model? For instance, in today's age of right-wing ideologies all over the world, and left-wing, I mean, equally strident, equally, terrifying. The debate gets sidetracked because of trolling, because people just start screaming at each other rather than at what was written, at the content. So this is two things. You sort of keep the trollers at bay, but also, do you have that level of influence then to really change policy, debate, are your subscribers strong enough to do that if they're contained in a community? And in fact, you sort of gate them off in a way,
right? In
some ways. So unlike a daily newspaper that has its screaming headlines that anyone can see or pick up or read or hear about on the radio or television, you're sort of gated. So how do you then have that reach?
Right. Okay, so there are two ways of... Yes.
So yours is a very reasonable, it looks like, you're doing very reasonable, commonsensical journalism, high-minded and all that. But it's quite likely that the people who vote in the elections, I mean, right-wing guys are on the ascendance, right-wing politics is in the ascendance in Netherlands. They may not even come to your website. You might be completely irrelevant. You might be doing noble stuff, but the people in your country may not be wanting to do the noble stuff. That's one question. Secondly, Abhinandan in the previous session spoke about the broken business model of Indian journalism. I feel that while profits are essential for good journalism, it's not a sufficient condition. For example, you look at the Times of India, the Hindustan Times, are big media organizations. They're immensely profitable, but they don't spend much on news gathering. I feel that our news budgets for these managements are what they can just, get by, what the readers will accept. It's mostly the common, the least they can spend. And see, it's more about a philosophy. If the founder of an organization says that he's in the eyeball gathering business, then I feel that, you cannot expect great journalism.
That's very true. That's one of the reasons I think Rob's business model works is because where he comes from,
yes,
forms the fundamental ethos of the organization. So that's an important aspect.
So you have to have that philosophy.
Yeah, I think that's a
of
given.
making journalism the infrastructure of democracy.
No, I agree that.
Otherwise,
I think that's a given for a lot of organizations. But I think the first part of your question is one that is a challenge, and of course what Alpana said.
Yes. So no, let me say this before I get to that question. I don't think there's a model for journalism. There are many models. And the model should flow from the things you want to accomplish. The way the correspondent is organized, the kind of people we attract, we are completely not organized to do the speed, BuzzFeed, click game. I don't think there should be room for BuzzFeed kind of stuff. There's no such thing as bad art, in a sense. Do you understand what I'm saying? So both questions were also about reaching people that are not in your bubble, let's say, stuff like that. First of all, there's no such thing as a mass medium in the sense that every news organization is a niche medium, by definition. There's nobody who's reaching everybody. Largest newspaper in the Netherlands reaches 1 in every 35 Dutch people. It's the largest newspaper. So niche you will be. The question is, how niche is it and how diverse is the niche? How many different kinds of people do you reach? And there are many ways to do this. So for example, we don't have a real paywall in the sense that you can share every article you get and you read, and you can share with anybody without limit. Everybody can read it. And it shows because we have 60,000 paying subscribers, but we have 2.5 million unique readers a month. So we reach way more people than actually pay us. That's one.
And the important thing is those are enough to keep you sustainable, and that's all you need.
Yes, exactly. That's why it says this has been paid for you to read by somebody else. And the more people pay, the better we get. But we don't need everybody to pay in order to... so I have never understood the hard paywall at all. Why would you put a wall in front of the things you want people to see? But there are other ways too. So one crucial aspect is because people identify with the people who work for you. So diversifying your audience is diversifying the people that work for you. If you have all the same people that look all the same and they have the same names and have the same interest and the same worldview, then you will get the same kind of people reading you. So diversifying the newsroom itself is a way of diversifying your audience after. That's a very important part of what we're trying to do. Actually, when people apply for jobs at our company, the thing we're looking for is how are you different? Not how are you alike. Do you already believe everything we believe? The way other people respond to what you do, it's not completely in your control. I mean, these simplifications will occur no matter what you do. And it happens to us. To most people, we are left-wing, liberal, blah, blah, blah. I mean, let me put it this way. For example, if you even acknowledge climate change happening, for example, to some people, you already are a liberal because you think that's actually happening. So there's no sense in doing something about this because it's based on presuppositions that are nonsensical.
But I think what you said really kind of answers that. And sorry, I'm going to have to wind up because we're over time. Well, Alpana, what you asked is, because we face that challenge as well, because when we started, there were just 4 of us, so 2 of us were seen as liberals, so this is a left liberal website. But when we got modern people as part of the team, we have a person who is identified as right. We have someone who's identified as socially liberal, but economically, fiscally conservative. So when people label you, I think they label the organization and they read the content with that prism. So if you already have a representative team, the likelihood that goes down, you can minimize it, you can't eliminate it.
But I want to add one thing, because there's a very simple strategy to, not to eliminate this labeling, but there is a way to lessen it. And that is just transparently and honestly respond to it. So for example, our climate change correspondent gets a lot of criticism from people who just deny the whole phenomenon he's talking about. And instead of just ignoring them and saying, oh, they're nutcases, probably, he responds. He says, look, you are you have a very different view on this than I do. Here is why I believe the things I believe. Here are the sources I base my beliefs on. Here is what I think of your criticisms or your sources that you bring into this debate. So he just honestly responds to the question at hand. Sometimes it just doesn't work. I mean, it's just two religious people talking to each other. They just don't believe in the same God, period. But most of the time, there will be a conversation, and there will be an overlap. So, for example, the other might respond saying, there was one very telling interaction I will give you as an example. Somebody said, climate change cannot be man-made because climate science is only 50 years old and the planet is 5 billion years old. So what do we know? And so our climate correspondent asks himself, like, how do you respond to this kind of reasoning? So the beginning was, so try to find the thing you share. And what was it? The person said the Earth is 5 billion years old. That was their argument. How do you know that? Because of science, geology. We know that the Earth is 5 billion years old because of a science that is basically 100 years old. So already there you have something you share, because you may not share the facts that our climate correspondent is promoting, but you share some kind of very similar facts in another area. So if you start that conversation on the basis of that shared acknowledgement, then actually you can come to a conclusion. I'm not saying this will solve all labeling and etc.
No, but I think it's a great place.
But actually talking to each other helps.
And for a lot of conversations, and which is what we hope to do at the Media Rumble year after year, to have conversations going with different ideological positions, different geographies, societies, models. And thank you all for being here. Thanks so much, Rob. Always a pleasure.
You're welcome.
Always have something to learn from you.
Thank you.
And yeah, that's it for now. Thanks.